Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of On the Record with Joe Watson. I am Joe Watson. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited for today's episode because we are interviewing a friend and a close Hey Joe Media partner, Glenn E. Martin. Glenn is the founder of Just Leadership USA, the founder of the Fortune Society, founder of the Closed Rikers campaign, and his current projects include Gem Trainers and Gem Real Estate. And I'm really proud and honored to have you here in this space, my friend.
Hey Joe, what's up, man? I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. We got a lot to talk about today. You are just the person to talk about some of these things. We're going to talk about your perspectives on abolition. We're going to talk about that really awesome social media campaign you did a few months ago, raising money for folks leaving prison in New York. And we are going to talk about Carlos Watson, and I'm going to jump right into that. For those of you who don't know, Carlos Watson is founder of Aussie Media. He was convicted in July of last year on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Now, in December, he received a 116-month prison sentence, a little shy of 10 years. And folks who have been critical of this process, including Glenn, contend that Carlos's prosecution reflects systemic biases against Black entrepreneurs. And Glenn recently wrote in a great Medium piece highlighting the potential conflicts of interest, noting that Judge Eric Comedy, which is an interesting name here in this case, who presided over the case, had financial ties to companies involved, and journalist Ben Smith, who reported critically on Aussie, had prior dealings with the company. And Glenn is advocating for a presidential pardon, and I wanted to talk to him more about this case. So I want to ask you, Glenn, specifically, what aspects of Carlos's case do you believe warrant greater public attention?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm glad you started here because this is the thing that's on my mind the most lately. As you probably know, Joe, I've been doing criminal justice reform work in one way or another for 25 years. In that entire time, I think I've only weighed in on an individual case once in the past to help a guy get out of prison through the parole board. That was about 22 years ago. So I am very thoughtful about cases where I get personally involved. I just met Carlos weeks ago, but I was introduced to him by another formerly incarcerated person. And as soon as I read the case, what I thought to myself was, this is exactly the kind of person that we should be advocating for. Although I would argue that most progressive folks would not see him as the most sort of not as a person deserving necessarily of an advocacy effort. Why? Because he's an extremely successful Black man who went to an Ivy League institution. It's not the way he grew up, but it's the way the direction his life ended up in. He worked at Goldman. And so, there's a lot of assumptions that, a guy like that should be able to take care of himself. I disagree. It's either the system works for everyone or it doesn't work for everyone. And, Judge Comedy, what a perfect pronunciation of his name, because the guy is comedic if this wasn't such a serious situation. I mean, essentially, this guy's in the middle of a case that is about alleged uh, fraud against some of the largest companies in the United States, Google, Goldman Sachs, and others. And at the same time, the judge is worth about $100 million himself and has tens of millions invested in the very companies who are the alleged victims of this situation. So what really stood out for me is that not just that, like, let's assume Carlos is guilty of everything. Like, his co-founder, Indian American, very privileged, very wealthy himself, initially wrote a public letter saying that he is the one who posed as a YouTube executive to try to convince a couple of the larger investors to go through with their investment. Then he rescinded that and he became evidence for the federal government against Carlos. But let's assume Carlos is guilty. Let's assume Carlos was on the call. He knew what this guy was doing, et cetera, which Carlos denies. The 10-year sentence at the end is so disproportionate for these cases. I mean, this case started with a guy named Ben Smith, who was a key figure at BuzzFeed, who wanted to buy Ozzy Media. Ozzy Media was on a trajectory to be $1 billion company. He offered 125 million, and then he kept offering. And then when he got to 300 million, and Carlos kept saying no, even though he offered Carlos the job to be the president of BuzzFeed if they would merge the companies, he got pretty pissed off, went to the New York Times and wrote a bunch of scathing articles about Carlos, which became the precedent for the indictment against Carlos. It's
Yeah,
insidious. The entire
I'm,
thing is insidious.
I mean that whole process with Ben Smith. I posted this on social media in response to something that you had posted, saying that this is not the old days of journalism. In the old days, a publication like the New York Times would have put somebody like Ben Smith writing about this in check. I mean, it's just kind of unheard of, the conflict there that exists.
Yeah, it's such a blatant conflict. I mean, Ben Smith, and he goes from being this key figure at BuzzFeed to somehow being this neutral reporter at the New York Times that can report out on media. And of course, this black-owned media company, the first of its kind, where he had learned a lot of their information through the negotiation to purchase the company, which is typically confidential information that is exchanged during the process of trying to figure out whether we're going to do business together. That became the fodder for his writing afterward. And he gets to walk up into the sunset. Stock interest at BuzzFeed. So BuzzFeed succeeding was hugely important to him. In the end, he walked away with millions of dollars. But he also walked off into the sunset pretty unscathed. And don't forget, this is the same guy who did the Russian dossier against Donald Trump that ultimately was proven to be fictitious. Whether you like Trump or not, like in the end, the reporting that he did was proven to be, as the president would say, fake news. And it's one thing for you to go after Trump. I don't know how much of a stink I'd raise, but going after Carlos Watson, who built the first black-owned, dynamic, young, energetic, on its way to success and fame media company, just bothers the heck out of me. And it's so difficult to get some of my colleagues to realize that this is important and that the system doesn't work for anyone. And that means that I'm not ready to throw anyone under the bus when I see a system that's railroading someone the way it is with Carlos.
Yeah, and I think it's really important what you mentioned at the top, that even if Carlos were guilty of all of these things, the issue is that the so many players involved were conflicted that should not have been involved in this case, and yet folks are saying, well, like elements like he's privileged, he has this privileged background, he can take care of himself, to, well, the evidence is pretty clear, whatever. They think that all of those things justify and make it okay for all these people who are conflicted to still be involved. And that to me is also, yes, it's the scary part of what people in our movement don't see.
If there's anything I've learned years ago is that due process matters. And I
Hmm.
don't get how that gets lost on people. If you deny due process to people you don't like, good luck when it's your turn to demand due process. And he who controls the process controls the outcome. And Judge Committee controlled the process. I mean, the defense offered up 30 witnesses. They got three from Judge Committee. One of the jurors said week one of a multi-week trial, she sat with some of the other jurors who were like, he's guilty. Week one out of a multi week trial, the majority of the jurors were like, he's guilty. And then badgered her into coming up with a guilty verdict. Within days, she said she regretted it. And of course, by then it was too late.
Yeah, yeah. You said you had met Carlos just a few weeks ago. Can you give us any update on his status, how he's doing?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. How would anyone be doing facing turning themselves in for a 10-year sentence at the age of 55? With a dad that's relatively old and having lost his mother who helped him to start the business. He's not doing well, but he's keeping hopes up, and trying to see if he can get this current president to pay attention. He didn't really think he had a chance with Biden. I don't think he had a chance with Biden, to be honest. But I do think he might have a chance with the current president. And I'm doing everything I can based on my 25 years of relationships to see what I can do to put him on the radar of
Yeah,
President Trump.
excellent, excellent. Well, hopefully we'll get some updates on that soon. I want to shift to the next topic of conversation here. I mean, a lot of folks see what's going on with Carlos and the systemic issues that exist there, and they end up saying, "This is why I am an abolitionist. This is why I believe in completely tearing down the system and starting from scratch." So I know that you're going to have a great perspective on abolition. And so you and I both work with a lot of folks that call themselves abolitionists. So I want to find out, one, how do you define it? And are you an abolitionist?
Yeah, if we're talking about abolitionists, the way it's used in the nonprofit industrial complex space, I'm not an abolitionist. Nothing has made me more moderate and pragmatic than abolitionists, unfortunately. And I'll tell you about a very concrete moment and anecdote, if you will, to help you understand why. I remember when I launched a campaign to close Rikers back in 2014 ish, 2015 ish, because of the experience I had at Rikers, because of the experience that I know hundreds of thousands of other people have had at Rikers. Um, it was difficult enough to put my career on the line to say out loud in a place like New York that we should shut down Rikers and that I was going to pursue what was defined at the time as America's most progressive mayor, Mayor de Blasio, to shut down Rikers. Like, I can't tell you how many of my colleagues told me I should never say that again publicly and I should abandon the campaign and so on. So that was already scary to do and to put my career on the line as someone who served time in prison. Um, but what I really remember clear as day, another scary moment was a group of abolitionists demanding that I come to Harlem and sit with them to discuss the campaign to close Rikers. And the irony didn't get lost on me that I was being summoned to Harlem by mostly white, young Wesleyan students on a freaking gap year or whoever they were to sit in a newly built building in gentrified Harlem at the time and being told that if I didn't get rid of every single cell in New York City, that I was going to be the target of the abolitionists. That there's no way they're going to support closing Rikers or support me unless it was a full abolition campaign. I mean, Rikers had 22,000 people when
Mm.
I was there as a 16-year-old and got stabbed 4 times. At the time when I said we should close it, they were about 11,300. We got that number down to about 2,900 at one point. How else do you define abolition? I mean, how much closer can you get to abolition? And the other thing, to be honest, is I live in the hood. I have enough money to live wherever I want in this country. I still live in the hood. I love it here. At the same time, motherfuckers need a timeout every once in a while. Every once in a while, somebody needs a timeout. And until you come up with a better solution right now, that happens to be our jail system. We're building new jail beds now and hopefully taking the old ones offline because I think the advocates took their foot off the gas with that part of the campaign. But my hope is yes, one day that we see abolition. But right now, I'm not beating that drum and taking away from opportunities to reduce the footprint of the correctional system in the lives of all Americans.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective and the position that you come from. I am sort of on a similar wavelength. You know, when I first got out of prison about almost 8 years ago now, um, the folks that I was working with were teaching me about abolition. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't understand the whole concept, but I could certainly get on board with working toward a world without prisons. Um, the issue for me since then has just been our messaging to the public around abolition. What is next? And I'm sure that there are lots of folks out there who have some kind of articulated vision for what comes after prisons. I have not heard one that is universally compelling, but I'm certainly supportive of a world without prisons. But I also think that we need not necessarily announce it. It's sort of like, I heard Willem Dafoe on the Louis Theroux podcast recently. Shout out Louis Theroux. Um, he was talking about how he goes out to dinner sometimes, and somebody is a vegetarian or a vegan, and they announce that to the whole table, looking at the menu, and Willem Dafoe's like, well, just order, just go ahead and order. And that's kind of how I feel about the abolition movement. Like, let's work toward a world without prisons. We don't have to announce it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The only thing I would add to that is I think if we're being intellectually honest, there's no way we're going to get to abolition by having a criminal justice reform movement, because that's not how we
Mm.
got to mass incarceration. You know, mass incarceration is the repository for people who failed out of all these other systems and policies. And if you really want abolition, we got to go so much further upstream and deal with so many different systems that we're just fooling ourselves and maybe making ourselves feel good. I think people are well intentioned when they say I'm an abolitionist. And I do think you often need a left flank. It makes people like me and you look reasonable. But at the same time, I think that if we think we're going to have a criminal justice reform movement that's relegated to just the criminal justice system, I think our grandkids are going to be like, boy, you guys weren't strategic at all.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, moving from kind of the language of the movement and our self righteousness in this movement to action. I want to talk about what you did a couple months ago. I gave you a shout out on social media for my favorite thing in 2024. I wanted to do that before we got too far into 2025. But a few months ago, you did a social media campaign raising money for your birthday. You wanted to raise thousands of dollars. You raised thousands of dollars and ended up giving all of that to folks who were getting out of jail and prison in New York. I want to talk to you about that and start with, like, social media usually rewards like uh, sensationalism and outrage, and that was not this. You ended up doing pretty well without that. Talk to me about that. Why do you think this campaign was successful?
Um, I think that we're in a day and age where people have little appetite for rhetoric over action. I think people are finally demanding change and demanding solutions and want a sense of sort of where we're all going together. And, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've done all different versions of this. And now that I am in the private sector, less worried about what a foundation is going to care about what I do and what I say, have the ability to also match funds, which is what I did. I raised thousands and then I matched it with thousands of my own money, and also able to even give away money and not worry about whether I can write it off on my taxes, which in this case I couldn't. And then lastly, I came out of prison 25 years ago. I remember what it was like. I remember living in the Bronx and sometimes walking to work in Manhattan because I couldn't afford the $2 to get on the train. Like that shit mattered. So me handing somebody $150, like I had guys like, "What do you want from me?" I was like, "I don't want anything. You don't even have to say thank you. Like take this money, walk away." And they were like, "Well, what can I do with it?" I was like, "You do whatever you want with it." Like I am. This is the most libertarian I've been in my life. Like I feel like we should all have limited say so about what people do with their lives, and so I would love to see more nonprofits, more foundations. Like I work with so many clients now that I encourage to find ways to put money directly in the hands of the people they say they care about. Um, because that's just where I've landed as an advocate. I think institutions are important, but institutions often become extremely conservative and in the business of keeping the institution alive and forgetting about the value of the individuals that they serve, or paying too much attention to the people who work at the institution. It's not that their lives are not important, but when you pay attention to the people who are working in the institution ahead of the people, your constituents who you say you support, you have a problem. And I think that kind of navel gazing, we've done way too much of it. We've been way too woke over the last few years. And arguably, where this country is now is an outgrowth of that sort of circular firing squad and paying way too much attention to ourselves.
Hmm. You're going to piss a lot of people off by saying way too woke.
Yeah, me, kid piss people. It's not even Saturday. I usually do this when I'm ranting on Saturday. It's a Wednesday afternoon rant.
I miss your Saturday rants, by the way. I know a lot of people miss your Saturday
I get a
rants.
lot of that. Thank you.
I'm glad that we're getting it today. Yeah, man, I see the same thing. Too many organizations giving the people that they say that they are serving everything but what they need the most, which is money. And I was so proud to see you do that and had to uplift it and amplify it. Um, what should organizations do to to show action? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, going forward, like what you did a few months ago.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'll say is over the last few years, what I've noticed is that my colleagues who stood up for things like the First Step Back at a time when it wasn't popular are the ones that right now are in key leadership roles in the field. And it taught me a lot about showing courage at a time when you may not be part of the sort of popular crowd by doing so. And that has taught me to be more and more ambitious, more and more courageous, and to try to instill that in the nonprofit leaders that I coach through my work at Gem Trainer. So I do believe there's a second and third venture leadership now emerging in the movement that understands some of the things that we're discussing here today. I would argue this. I think one of the most important things that nonprofits who care about these issues can do is to recognize something I've said for years. We do not work for philanthropy. Philanthropy works for us. Like most philanthropic institutions have amassed wealth on the very same issues that we say that we're trying to untangle, to undo. This very same systemic prejudices, the very same systemic racism, all the things that we say we're trying to undo. Many of these foundations were founded by leaders, titans of industry who literally benefited from those things. So why would you think that you're in service to the foundation? Like their power comes from us. I've always believed that. When I was doing the work to close Rikers, I'd always remind people, yes, this mayor is sitting here in this beautiful building with these beautiful pillars, super intimidating and Romanesque and standing on high and always behind the podium. It means nothing. The minute the people decide that the people in power don't need to be in power, things change. And so, what I try to tell nonprofits that I'm working with is, if you genuinely believe in the things you say you believe in, then have your actions match your rhetoric, and start out by recognizing that the moments when your knees are shaking because your funders are so important to you because you've tied your career to a certain issue, and if we're all being intellectually honest, that is the case, then those are the moments where you have to actually speak up and recognize that they get their power from you and not the other way around, and demand from them that you have the flexibility with those foundation dollars to do what you know people really need. Because when I was running an organization, I remember I'd have to get people to sign fake fucking contracts just to give them money to pay their rent because I had to have a way to convince the funder that this person did some work for me. They didn't do work for me. They were a tireless advocate for closing Rikers, and they would work 12 hours a day and then still show up at the rally to get things done. And every once in a while, they didn't have enough money for rent. So it would be great if foundations got to the point where they understood that those are the things that are important. But that happens if the people running nonprofits find the courage to demand it.
Yeah. You know, we're entering an era of politics post election where obviously lots of people are scared, and I get why lots of people are scared. This incoming administration could do a lot of damage to a lot of people. I get that. I'm also, however, excited about what's coming because I feel like we're getting out of an era of left versus right politics and moving into action versus inaction. And as somebody who believes in the power of learning from our mistakes, I think it's fine if we end up making some mistakes along the way, as long as we are acting, holding ourselves accountable, holding each other accountable, and improving. And I think that that's hopefully the future we're headed toward. What do you think?
I think progressive people didn't realize when they were in a knife fight and they lost. And and many Americans who people would never have thought would have voted for this administration absolutely did. And there's a lesson in there. People were, one, fearful of where they saw themselves financially and otherwise. And people were looking for a way forward. And it shocks the conscience that this is where people chose to invest in the way forward, yes. But I agree with you. If we can't get to the point of having a more pluralistic society, then we are going to crush ourselves. So it's either we're on a path to civil war, and that's what'll get us there, or this is an opportunity for us to figure out how to work together and, yes, get it right and get it wrong. I mean, arguably, the left hasn't created space for people to get it wrong. We have crushed people, we have erased people, we've blacklisted people. Like, all of those policies were so carceral. Why are we shocked that the minute people got a chance to latch on to something else, they took it? I mean, we see it. If you don't give people a space to have hope, to see something on the horizon, to recognize that the world can be different and that there's going to be a way for them to take care of themselves and meet their basic needs, human beings are survivors. People are going to find a way to do that, even if it means crossing teams and going to play on the other team. And that happened in a big way with this election. And maybe at some point the Dems can pull things back in their direction. But there is something like the way this current administration speaks with the sharp end of the axe. I think people at least know what they're getting. And there's something refreshing about knowing that people are telling you the truth. I mean, if I'm going to speak for myself for a second, I'm mostly angry about how duped I was by the mainstream media about what was happening during that election cycle. And so look, man, I'm more moderate than I was when I was younger. I'm definitely more moderate than I was before the left sort of mob came after me as an individual black male leader. Um, and at the same time, I am saying to myself that something different is better than being lied to, better than being manipulated, better than being used, and better than watching people I care about not understand where the future is and what the way forward looks like.
Yeah, here, here. And I hope that this sends a message to the folks that we typically work with that the days of, talking anti-carceral, talking about how people in prison deserve a fair chance at life, that they deserve humane conditions, that they deserve to be treated as human beings, that, uh, you know, people deserve opportunity and the privilege that others have. And then seemingly when folks come out and they make a bad decision, they are abandoned. There is this purity test that I hope the folks on our side have learned that they've got to get rid of.
Two words. One, shame. Worst thing in the world. I will never let anyone shame me again. It is a powerful tool that was used by the left to marginalize people who didn't agree with the core message of the party, if you will, if you talk about Democrats, but just the ideology of the left. And I think that was a huge mistake. This whole either you're in or you're out, a lot of people gave them the middle finger and said, I'm out. So one is shame. The second one is grace. Grace is not transactional. Grace is something you extend to people, even if you think they don't deserve it. And what I have found is that the left, with all of its progressive rhetoric, chooses who it likes and who it doesn't like, who belongs and who doesn't belong. And in our case, around criminal justice, who actually deserves to do time in the system. And the minute you decide that the people you hate deserve a system that you say is archaic and harmful, et cetera, you have weakened your argument, you've weakened your position, and you have emboldened the opposition. Because the minute you capitulate that someone or some group belongs in that system is the minute you've actually validated their argument.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this approach has really hurt us in changing conventional narratives around the criminal justice system. Um, I want to talk a little bit here toward the end of our time together about our movement's reliance on like jargon heavy language and how that repels the very people that we need to reach: reporters, mainstream media, the general public, right? And so I want to ask you, like, have you seen reporters yourself shy away from stories about the systemic failures that we're trying to change because of inaccessible language, or because the message wasn't, delivered effectively, too muddy?
Yeah, if I walked outside right now and asked the guy sleeping at my back door of my building, how does it feel to be unhoused? He's gonna look at me like I'm fucking crazy. Like, he knows what homeless means. He's not sure what unhoused means. Look, man, I get that softening language and using proper language humanizes people. I don't that doesn't get lost on me. Like Eddie Ellis led the way with this at a time when there was no movement, there was no resources, and he was trying to figure out what tools are at his disposal, given the lack of resources. The first thing he realized is we can at least control the way people talk about us. Great. That was 2005-ish. Like it's 20 something years later. Even the New York Times editorial board did a great piece on the importance of language. So we've sort of had that
The AP, the
discussion.
Associated Press, has changed its reporting
100%.
guidelines.
100%. At the same time, when I did that giveaway recently, someone said, "Oh, we should just send a letter to a couple of reporters, let them know you're doing it." I said, "Go ahead if you want to do it." They showed it to me. I was like, "No, no, no. You got to change the title. It's got to say Millionaire Ex-Con gives money to former inmates." And they were like, "What?" Like, I was like, "Yep, exactly," because I want them to see it and hear it and understand it, blah, blah, blah. Look, man, I think people get shocked as a black man. They expect me, like, in some ways, I'm very radical. Like, I believe in what I believe in, and I've positioned myself financially to almost say anything I want. I mean, I still know where the line is, but I can pretty much say anything I want in the world these days because I have positioned myself not to be a target of people sort of taking away my ability to work the way they did in the past. Having said that, I want to be effective. I judge my decisions, my actions, my investments based on, can I walk into a prison, open up a cell, walk in and look a guy in the face and be like, this is what I did, or look a woman in the face and say, this is what I did, and feel like I can walk out of that cell with my dignity. That's who I care about. I care about the people who are being deprived of their liberty and relying on people like me and you to help give them back that liberty, or to help convince policymakers to give them back that liberty. That is my measure. People like Darren, who runs the Ford Foundation, people who run large nonprofits, I have some level of respect for them. But at the same time, I will walk all over them to free a person from a prison cell. And most people won't. And I get where the careerism thing comes from. I think maybe we've over professionalized advocacy work and policy work, but I know where my moral compass is. I don't always get it right, and I love that I don't always get it right. And anyone out there waiting for me to get it wrong again, you won't have long to wait. That's the first thing I'll say. I will get it wrong, but at the
Hmm.
same time, with all of my fallible self, I'm going to continue to try to do the right thing to get people out of cells.
And that's what I love about you, and I love about other folks in the movement who that's still their first priority. They know what it was like. They know what it was like to be in that cell, and I love that we are seeing more of us in positions of leadership, and having the opportunity to help. uh, there's not a whole lot of people who have built themselves up to have the opportunity to help like you have, but there are certainly plenty who could, and I'm so happy to see them and us get into that position, because nobody fights harder for folks in prison than people who were in prison. And I just appreciate so much how you walk the walk and talk the talk. So it's an honor to be able to get to work with you. I don't want to make this too. I know you like to tell people how much people hate you, and all I see is people who love you. I don't want to embarrass you or
That's because you're
focus. I
not.
don't want to kill your brand.
That's because you're not in my inbox. But look, man, I've learned in the past that for every person that hates me for telling the truth, there's going to be a couple people waiting around the corner to love me, and that's where I hang my hat. And it's just been such a pleasure working with you, also getting to know you over the years, and realizing that not only are you an amazing advocate and friend and organizer and really thoughtful person around this issue, but you bring a set of professional skills also that has hugely benefited me and many of my clients, and that relationship means a lot to me. I love being able to say, hey, I work with a guy, let me tell you how dynamic he is, and also mention your journey and what got you here. So yeah, don't ruin my brand. You're all about building up the movement.
Don't worry. Plenty of people still think you're a giant asshole after watching this.
Good, thank you. That's what I'm shooting for.
All right, Glenn, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. It's not going to be the last time. Glenn and I work on a lot of projects. I plan on having him on the Record podcast often to talk about things like this. So if you love this podcast, rest assured you will see him again. And until the next episode of On the Record with Joe Watson, peace.
Peace.